Hello, welcome to another Ideas with Purpose webinar featuring Thinkers50 shortlisted thinkers, brought to you in association with Executive Networks, our Talent Award partner. I'm Des Dearlove.
And I'm Stuart Craner, and we're the founders of Thinkers50, the world's most reliable resource for identifying, ranking, and sharing the leading management ideas of our age. In November at the Thinkers50 Awards Gala 2021, we will be announcing the all-new Thinkers50 ranking of the world's leading management thinkers and the recipients of the Thinkers50 Distinguished Achievement Awards. All the information about the awards gala can be found at thinkers50.com. It would be fantastic if you could join us.
Now, over the last few weeks, we've been announcing the shortlist for the awards. So please check them out on the Thinkers50 website. And today, we're delighted to welcome one of the shortlisted thinkers for the Talent Award, Dorie Clark. This should be a great conversation. So please send in your observations, insights, and questions along the way, and we will be sure to put them to Dorie.
Dorie is the author of the newly published book, The Long Game, which promises to show us the route to become a long-term thinker in a short-term world. Dorie is a Thinkers50 ranked thinker and has a track record of producing thought-provoking books, including Reinventing You, Stand Out, and Entrepreneurial You. She's also a producer of a Grammy-winning jazz album, a graduate of Harvard Divinity School, a former presidential campaign spokesperson, and is currently working on a musical.
Whew. Dorie, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Let's, if we may, start by talking about the genesis of the book. Where did it come from?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here, Stuart and Des. So in writing The Long Game, one of the real drivers for me was I started my own business doing consulting and business school teaching and writing about 15 years ago. And I realized in that process, I think almost anyone who goes to work for themselves realizes with great alarm in the early days, oh, wait, it seems like everyone is doing this thing. How do I differentiate myself in the market? And it really becomes a kind of existential question. And I worked hard to try to figure it out for myself. But what really, and I learned a lot of lessons, which I have attempted to share in some of my previous books, but what really hammered home for me the importance of the topic of long-term thinking that I share in The Long Game was about 5 years ago, I launched an online course and community called Recognized Expert to try to help other smart, talented professionals be able to understand how to break through and how to get their ideas heard in the marketplace so they can make a bigger difference. And now 600 plus people have been through the program. And so from that, I've really gotten to see sort of spread at this population level, what some of the challenges are. And frankly, one of the biggest ones at a very basic level is that everything takes longer than we want it to. It is oftentimes a very frustrating journey where people have a lot of roadblocks and a lot of obstacles. And it is important, I believe, frankly, for the good of society, for the good of the world, for their ideas to get out there and be heard. But a lot of factors are mitigating against that. And one of them is just that people often get discouraged because they feel like, wow, I guess it's not really working out. And I wanted to create a book that shared a framework to enable good people to be able to persist longer and to really understand what it takes to get their ideas out into the world so that more of them can do it.
So, Dorie, is this a new phenomenon? I mean, has this always been the case? Is this the same old same? Or have we always been a bit impatient? Has it always been, frenetically busy and all those things? Or is it getting worse? I mean, is this a new problem?
I think it's a little bit both and. I mean, certainly it is part of human nature that now is much better than later. I think we probably all agree on that. But also, much like some other trends in society, things have been accelerating pretty rapidly in recent years. Certainly, social media does not help. We have always, as humans, compared ourselves to other people, marked our progress by looking at the success of other people. And nowadays, the people around us are not just our immediate circle, our immediate friends and family. The people around us is the entire world. And so feeling like, oh my gosh, they know what I'm doing, or they know what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Or, why do they have it figured out and I don't have it figured out, can be quite paralyzing for a lot of people. And additionally, we're, just hopefully coming out of COVID which was a time when short-term thinking was of necessity pretty much all we were doing, all we could do. I feel like now is a time that we need to reset, we need to recalibrate and focus again on ideating for the long term so that we actually are able to be proactive once again in our lives and not just reactive.
That was going to be my next question. Has the pandemic made us more keener on the long term? And I suppose you're right. We are. This is a good time to launch the book.
Well, I certainly didn't. I didn't have the prescience and the forethought to be able to time it so perfectly. But as it happens, I think that it has arrived at a fortuitous moment. One of the anecdotes that I recount in The Long Game is that shortly after I got the book contract, I was talking with someone that I kind of know casually, and he asked about the topic of the book, and I said, "Oh, it's about long-term thinking," and he basically just sort of laughed in my face. He's like, "Ha ha, we don't need that anymore." It's very ominous, but I believe that we do need long-term thinking in the world. It's true, when you're in the middle of a crisis, long-term thinking is not necessarily the order of the day. But it is also true that we cannot be in crisis thinking forever. That is not healthy for us. And it means that if all we do is react, we're not really able to create the agenda for our lives that we want. I mean, most of us in some way or another have some kind of goals for what we want to be doing, what we want to accomplish, where we want to end up. We're not going to get there if all we do is just respond to, the urgent and never turn to the important. And so I feel like now it's time for the scales to tip back in the favor of long-term thinking.
The first section of the book is called White Space. I'm imagining that's often the lack of white space in my diary or on my calendar. Is that a reasonable? And what can we do to create? Presumably, you're suggesting we need a bit more white space.
I am. And in fact, of course, just coming off of a book launch, I feel this even more acutely. One of the themes that I also talk about in The Long Game is the concept of thinking in waves and realizing, there is a season for everything. And certainly when you're in book launch season, you sort of have to just hold your breath and muscle through because the days are going to be incredibly long. But similarly, that's not how your whole life should be. There's a problem if that's how your whole life always is. And I think for many people, we've gotten into a stage where that's exactly how it is. You look at the calendar and it's just this ocean of purple or whatever color is on our Google calendars, and it feels oppressive. And you cannot think properly under those conditions. A number of years ago, I did an interview which I actually shared in my book, Stand Out, with David Allen, the productivity expert, the creator of Getting Things Done. And he had what I thought was a very astute observation, which is that it's not that it takes a lot of time to have a great idea. Probably all of us at one point or another have had this, the flash in the shower or something like that. But what it does take is it takes mental space. And that is what has been in such short supply. When you keep, racing from one thing to another and feeling behind, you never have the space to be asking the questions or making the connections that we need to make.
I mean, what I like about you, Dorie, is you actually practice what you preach. In that I think you have played a long game and done it very intelligently. But when most people think about playing a long game, it requires kind of relentless focus. But I think what's interesting about you is, as the introduction rather demonstrated, you're up to a huge number of things. You've got a big portfolio of interests and activities. Doesn't that work against actually achieving long-term objectives because you're filling out your time with so many things? Yeah,
it's a worthwhile question, and it could. But I like to try to put in place structures that enable me, hopefully, to be able to get the best of both worlds. And here's what I mean by that. It is certainly true that if our focus is divided, if we're constantly jumping from this to this to this, even just the switching costs can be very challenging. Certainly, if we're doing radically different types of things, there are going to be challenges because you're not able to really take advantage of the power of networks you've built or knowledge that you've accrued because you're playing in so many fields. But there's really two principles at play as I think about it. The first, which I talk about in the long game, is 20% time. And this is a concept that was popularized by Google. Originally, before them, it was 3M that had pioneered it as 15% time. But the idea is that you take a portion, just a small portion, but enough so that you could theoretically get traction, and take a small portion of your time to do experimental work or experimental projects. And this is valuable because 80% of your effort in one zone, your main zone, enables you to progress pretty far. But 20% is just having a bet. And this side bet, first of all, it hedges against risk because you are doing something slightly different. And if, God forbid, the main gig collapses in some way, you have something that you could turn to. But also, assuming everything proceeds apace with your quote unquote regular job, it gives you room to try out new things that actually might evolve over time into something distinct, something interesting, something that, potentially, lucrative, or something potentially that could make a big impact. And so in my case, for the past 5 years, I've been pursuing musical theater writing, which is very different, but you're able to actually, with 20% time compounded, make a pretty big difference. Now, the other piece, which I actually talk about in my previous book, Entrepreneurial You, is about creating multiple revenue streams. And this is something I just want to clarify. It is not about doing wildly different things in your business. It's about being strategic and understanding that you can take the same core IP, the same core intellectual property, and just leverage it in different ways so that you can diversify your revenue base. So the same thing that you do, it could start out as a book, and then you create an online course, then you do an in-person workshop, then you teach a course at a business school about it. It's all the same type of thing, but you're maximizing your returns and minimizing your risk by finding different ways to build out the portfolio.
I think at Thinkers50, we talk about repurposing content and repurposing IP, and we don't like to see good ideas wasted. So we absolutely agree with that. We're joined. I see Karen Walker is here. She's singing your praises. She says Dorie's a genius. In addition to being recognized by Thinkers50, that's good. This is her best book yet. And I should have said at the start, congratulations on making the bestsellers list for the Wall Street Journal, which is a huge achievement. That must have that's when all the playing the long game pays off, when something like that happens, presumably. Were you expecting that? Were you surprised?
Thank you so much. I was very excited. I had certainly been working toward it. Speaking of the long game, you're exactly right. You have to, the challenge about hitting the bestseller list, which people who are authors definitely understand. I know you do, but for folks who are not familiar with the process, it relates to how many books you sell in a given week. So even if your book is a really good book, and even if it's very successful over the long term, ironically, hitting a bestseller list is sort of a short-term goal, because it's, okay, literally how many sales can you sandwich into one week? So it requires a lot of forethought, because you want to be mobilizing a launch team and mobilizing pre-orders and things like that to be able to make it work. But part of how it, of course, factors into the long game, and this is a concept that I talk about a lot in my work, is social proof. Because we live in a world, frankly, where people are so busy, they're so overtaxed cognitively, that they just really don't have a lot of time to focus in on you or your thing or whatever it is. And so if you are able to somehow marshal the social proof to demonstrate at a glance the credibility of your work, and Wall Street Journal bestseller is one of the ways to do that. It's kind of an easy reference point that people understand. They say, okay, this is a legitimate thing. It enables you and your work to travel further, because more people are willing to listen to it or to hear your ideas out of the gate.
Yeah. Jonathan Tripp says structure and focus is critical for creating the 20% Dorie spoke about. I think it is, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of it's obvious, but it's one of those things we don't actually apply in reality. So what's stopping us? Because we all know, I mean, we've read the exact Google, and we know that we need more space, but it's incredibly difficult.
Well, it's absolutely true. I think, one of the points that I make in the early part of the long game, which I think is interesting. This was a topic that really drew me in personally. We all know what the obvious culprits are when it comes to being busy. I mean, everyone can point to their calendar and say, oh, the meetings, or oh, the emails. And we feel oppressed by that. We are oppressed by that. That is not untrue. But in addition to that, it turns out there's actually some just interesting, more hidden or subconscious reasons behind it. Part of it, of course, is that actually stepping back and asking some questions about, are we doing the right things? Are the actions we're taking today leading toward the long-term outcome that we actually want? Those can frankly be very uncomfortable questions to ask ourselves. Sometimes we might have a goal, either a personal goal or one that's been, forced on us from above. Like, oh, you have to grow sales by 30%. We don't know how to do it. And it is incredibly uncomfortable. And it's a lot easier to just keep doing that thing and not asking the questions. Also, there's been interesting research by Sylvia Bellezza and her colleagues at Columbia Business School talking about how busyness in our modern society has really become a form of status. You ask people, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so busy. And it's essentially a way of, humble bragging and saying that you're so in demand. And so there's a lot of reasons mitigating against us actually making the changes necessary to stop being so busy.
I suppose part of the discipline is actually knowing when to stop. So say your ambition is to get into musical theatre, write a musical, but so it's a five-year plan, but 1 year in, you think, so it's actually having the discipline to say, actually, this isn't going to happen. It's not working out, and then changing direction. That must be part of the skill as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the tenets that I really try to follow in all this, people are, for obvious reasons, right? But people are so fixated on failure sometimes. And, like you'll get questions sometimes like, oh, but what if I have an idea and it's the wrong idea? Or what if I have an idea and it fails? And I actually really think that we are way too quick to be afraid of failure and in fact, to call things failures that are not really failures. I consider a failure to be, some sort of like catastrophic loss where you went all in and then you're, oh, well, we had to write off $500 million or whatever it is. Like, okay, that's a failure. But honestly, if we went to Las Vegas together and you put down $1 on a slot machine and it didn't pay out, are you going to call that a failure? I mean, no, that's ridiculous because it's too small to be a failure. You're like, yeah, whatever. I entertained myself for 30 seconds. $1 is not a failure. $100,000 or $1 million might be a failure. And so I want us to really take the best in our own lives and our own careers from the lean startup methodology and say, what are the smallest bets we can make so that honestly, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. Who cares if you lose $1? Who cares if you spend an hour having coffee and doing an informational interview with someone about a field you think you might like? And at the end of the hour, you're like, wow, I totally don't want to do that. That's actually really good because you might have wasted the hour, but you saved yourself 1,000 hours pursuing something that would be wrong for you. So I think we need to reframe.
I think it was one of the tennis players, I think it was Billie Jean King, said that there's no such thing as failure, it's only feedback. And if you think about that, if you think about a professional sports person, if you think of every game you lose as just being that, an opportunity to learn and get better, it's not a bad sort of philosophy for an entrepreneur as well, to take everything as long as you haven't lost the shop or lost your shirt. So busyness, though, we talked a little bit about that, and it can be addictive almost. And as you say, people hide in the busyness rather than actually do the quality thinking that they need to do in order to perhaps course correct or make a change. But is part of this also not just stopping a project, but putting some things down? We as we go through life, we pick up more and more activities and more roles. But in order to do something else, do we need to put some things down, let go of some things?
Yeah, that is certainly a piece of it. And, I have always been a fan of the art of strategy and immersing myself in it. And one of my favorite strategy books, in addition to my good friend and yours, Rita McGrath's, which are wonderful, is I have long been a partisan of a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummelt from UCLA. And the point that he makes, which I think is so basic and so profound, is that at its heart, it's not that most good strategy is that brilliant. It's not like, oh, who could have thought of that? They have to be a genius. Most good strategy is actually things that people would be like, yeah, that's a really good idea. The problem and the reason why it stands out so much is that almost no one is willing to make those calls. And the reason is that they refuse to decide. Strategy and making powerful choices is being willing to say we do this and not that. And it is very, very hard for people to be willing to do it because you have to accept the consequence that comes with it. But ultimately, for all of us, need to understand we have limited time, we have limited bandwidth, and we can try to pretend that something won't suffer if we over-index in a different direction. We can try, and for a while, it might work, kind of, sort of, if we don't sleep, to stuff 120% of the activities into 100% of the time. But it is never a long-term strategy that is viable. And so you're exactly right, Des. We need to be making choices about what we're doing and what we're not doing. And we need, as we get further in our careers and more successful, that actually means making challenging choices about how we tighten the criteria of what we say yes to. And it can feel weird, it can feel uncomfortable, and no one tells you specifically that you have to do it, but you do have to do that.
And there's a great overlap between, I mean, your book is about the personal long game, but the organizational long game, many of the same observations apply.
Very much so. Yes, that's exactly right. And again, these things are not they're not difficult per se, but they're devilishly hard when you do it. We talk about things like when this was an example that Richard Rummelt shared in his fabulous book. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, we forget now, Apple used to make printers. They used to make peripherals. And he said, no, we're absolutely not going to do that. We need to get back to basics. We're cutting out everything that is not a computer. And additionally, we are cutting out everything except for 4 models. We're cutting out, we have a personal and a business computer. We have a laptop and we have a desktop. That's it. And you need to be able to focus in on what is most crucial there so that you can over-index on it. That is not incompatible with having the diversity of income streams or the diversity of activities, but things need to be in their proper strategic place, and you need to be willing to make hard choices about it, because there's always going to be partisans that are not happy about it. But as leaders, whether it's of our lives or our companies, we have to be strong enough to choose and commit.
It's a sort of process of simplification and decluttering in a lot of these cases, I think. And if we can declutter, because organizations sort of grow, stuff, projects, ideas, opportunities grow like topsy. So if you don't kind of pull out the weeds now and then, you're going to end up overwhelmed. Another term I liked from the book was strategic patience, while we're on the sort of strategy thing. Tell us about strategic patience.
Yes. So strategic patience is a term that I have developed and used because regular patience is very frustrating to me. And it is something that I just have never really enjoyed very much or relished. Regular patience, to me, so often reads as, and honestly, I think is, a way of people telling you to shut up. Because this, just be patient kind of means stop complaining, stop advocating, stop pushing for something, just it will take care of itself. I am a little skeptical about this. I don't actually think that things just take care of themselves. I think that we need to work toward them as well. I accept, and this is where the patience part of strategic patience comes in, I accept that things often happen more slowly than we want them to. That is an unfortunate fact in life. I wish it weren't true, but it is. But also, I think that we are not going to end up with the outcomes that we want if we just say, oh, well, I'll wait and good things will happen. I think we need to be a little bit more muscular about our pursuit of those goals. And so to me, strategic patience is about creating a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, watching what is happening, pivoting if necessary, and understanding all the while, okay, there's probably going to be roadblocks. This probably isn't going to play out exactly how I want it to. And yet I will embark on it nonetheless.
Karen Walker says, magic occurs when personal and organizational long games are aligned. And never a truer word, Karen. Alexandra from Poland asks, how do you stay so positive?
Yes.
And I think that's true. I mean, it could be a front, Dorie. You could be relentlessly negative away from the microphone.
Well, it actually, you can survey my friends, but actually it is pretty true. I am pretty positive about things. I will say that, to cite another great business thinker that I admire, Jeffrey Pfeffer, in his great book, Power, why some people have it and others don't. One of the points that he makes, which I think is really quite inspiring, on one level at least, is he says, look, it's possible in some cases, if you are a talented person and within a particular organization or a particular context, those talents are not being appreciated, if you're being blocked or stymied, it may not be the right place for you. Because the truth is, statistically, if it is true that you actually are smart and good, if we put you in a universe, 990 times out of 1,000, you will be rewarded. You will be able to be successful in what you're doing. In a given circumstance, it is possible, though, just random chance, that you might have a boss that hates you, or you might have a company culture that, you're great at finance and the company culture is like, no, finance is stupid. We're all about blah, 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 whatever that is. And if that's the case, you need to go to a different place where those talents can be recognized. But he raises the point, and I think it's so valuable, that we have to understand that, one person blocking us or one culture that does not appreciate us does not mean that we are not valuable. It is about statistics. It's about the laws of averages, and it's about finding the right home where your ideas can be nurtured and appreciated, and that your value can be appreciated. And so I think for me, I have just always felt like when I am encountering roadblocks or people that just don't like, for whatever reason, they don't like what I do or they don't like what I'm offering, I refuse to accept that as the definitive judgment. I think we are far too quick to give away power to people that don't deserve it. And I really mean this, that just because someone's an editor, or just because someone is the dean, or, whatever, just because someone's the CEO, it does not mean that their judgment is inherently better than yours. It might be, maybe, but it also might not be. And so it's incumbent upon all of us, if we really feel like we have something that we want to share, to keep trying and to keep pushing forward. And, just as one example, and this made a big impact on me. Early in my career, I was working as a journalist, and I had this editor that, frankly, I felt like I could not do one thing right with her. She would send my pieces back just with rivers of red ink, of like literally everything she wanted me to reword. Just, she didn't like any of it. And if you take that in, you think like, oh, wow, I must be kind of terrible. But a part of me wondered, I'm like, is she just like negging me? But it's hard to tell. But I ended up getting laid off from my job as a journalist. And my first freelance piece that I submitted for a different publication, which in fact was a more prestigious publication, I submitted it, and I was so astonished. Literally, this is literally true. They ran it with no edits. They did not change a contraction. They did not change a conjunction. they ran it literally as I submitted it. And I thought, okay, this is a different context, a different place where they're appreciating what I'm doing. And it's important for all of us to not take some random person's word as definitive about us.
I mean, Stuart and I, as you know, came from a background in journalism as well. And I certainly had an editor at one point. Well, we've had lots of editors that we may or may not have seen eye to eye with. But I remember one in very early days who it took me a while to figure out, but she didn't know what she wanted. So it was an impossible ask, really, because she would probably say she'd know it if she saw it, but it's really hard to take direction from someone who doesn't actually know what they want. Looking back down into this chat here, Hillary is asking, she says, love the idea of strategic patience. Dorie Clark, did I paraphrase this right? Knowing when to be patient and why, and when to have the muscle to drive the innovation or change required to progress.
I think that's well put, Hillary. Yes, thank you.
Too. Yes. Yes, correct, Hillary. You got it spot on. At the end of the book, you talk about, because we've sort of alluded to this a little bit, that there are some sort of personal qualities that are required in order to apply many of the principles that are in the book. Particularly, you talk about independence, curiosity, which is a great word, and resilience. Can you talk a little bit about those and why they're so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to playing the long game, one of the elements, again, to the point that things take longer than we want them to, inevitably, if something is a meaningful enough goal, if it's the kind of thing that you actually, put down and say, yes, I would be willing to work on this and for this for a number of years, even, presumably it's a meaningful goal. It's not necessarily easy to accomplish. And because there's some distance of time involved, that actually makes it statistically much more likely than not that the journey to get there is not going to progress exactly as we might hypothesize or as exactly as we might map out. So we have to be resilient in the sense that we know that it is almost always going to be a certainty that we will be blocked, we will be rejected. We are going to encounter some of those people like your early editor, Des, that, they don't know what they want or whatever it is they do want. It's not you. And we have to ensure that we're willing to just say, it's not that we have to love the process, but at a certain point, we just have to say, okay, well, that's annoying, but let me try a different thing. Let me try a different path. We have to keep doing that. And we can keep doing it if our commitment to the goal is sufficient. So, resilience matters a lot. Also curiosity, because frankly, these early hypotheses that we have, they may turn out to change. We might discover something different, something better along the way. So the goal may change, our approach may change. Certainly I can imagine a scenario where, you have some goal and, let's say it takes you 10, 20 years to get there. Even new technologies might come out. You might have had a situation where you say, I'm really committed to X issue. I want to do everything I can to get X out in the public sphere. And, maybe your original vision was you'd give speeches on it or write about it. But all of a sudden, podcasting, let's say, emerges as a technology. And you say, oh, maybe the best way to get this out there is to start a podcast talking about it. Well, let me learn. Let me talk to some people that are doing this. Let me see how hard it would be. Let me see what it would look like. And through that curiosity, you might determine, oh, this is actually an even better strategy than what I had come up with. And so being open to that, keeping the goal in mind, but being flexible as to the means can be very powerful.
Jennifer points out a serious disconnect. Why is it at university or grad school they promote the benefits of long-term thinking, yet in the world of work, rarely is that thinking adhered to? Ideally, this will start a movement, Dorie. And I think she's right, because it is talked about theoretically in education about the long game and playing the long game. But I suppose that goes back to your point that we all know is a good idea. What about your own timescales, Dorie? I see you had kind of a 5-year plan for the musical. Would you go further than 5 years? Do you ever look 10 years ahead or further than that?
Oh, I do. Yes. I actually, technically, the musical theater plan was a 10-year plan, and I am 5 years into the 10-year plan. So I'm continuing to make progress on it. In fact, one of the pieces of feedback that I've heard from people about the long game is they said, "Oh, it was kind of bold of you to write about the goal that is still in progress." But I think in the spirit of being transparent the way I want to, I don't just want to talk about things when they're a fait accompli. I think that sometimes, we have to talk about things while we're doing them, with the understanding that, what, it might not work out the way we want, but there is no shame in that. We control the process, not the outcome. And I think we have to remind ourselves of that. So in my case, I am quite proud of the progress that I've made heretofore on this 10-year goal. So the 10-year goal is to get a show on Broadway for the 2026 season. I do not know if this will happen. I hope it will happen, and I'm working toward it. But what I can tell you 5 years into it is I have gone from literally having no idea how to write a musical, never having done it before, to being accepted into and having completed a fairly prestigious musical theater training program, having written a complete musical, and having been accepted to 2 other theatrical incubator projects, essentially, to kind of use business language for it. In fact, including one that I'm doing right now. I was just accepted to it. It was a big week for me a couple of weeks ago. I was accepted to it the same week that the long game came out. And so over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be working with a collaborator where we're writing a 10-minute musical from scratch that will be performed at Symphony Space in New York in mid-November. So I'm continuing to move the ball forward on that. But to answer your broader question, I also have a 20-year plan for myself, which is that I would like to become a United States ambassador. I am relatively agnostic about which country, except my preference is something not dangerous, and I think that would be very fun. I've spent my career working in communications, and I got my start working in political communications. So I think the opportunity to be able to leverage that and to help forge diplomatic alliances and hopefully use my ability to honed by representing candidates, my ability to ideally not say things that are too stupid, could be helpful to America. So I would like to try to be able to do that.
You're setting the bar quite low there, but maybe not. I don't know. Something else you touch upon on the book, and this sort of comes through in what you were just talking about, is that some of this, to be a sort of a long game thinker, a long-term thinker, it's partly about what you're optimizing for, because as you say, this, and back to the grad school point, what happens is people finish grad school, or they leave university or college, and then they get into job, and in sort of the absence of knowing what else to optimize for, they optimize for money. Usually that's how we end up in the jobs we end up in. Organizations do the same thing. I was lucky enough to spend some time with Reed Hastings from Netflix, and he was saying one of the big differences with Netflix is that they optimize for innovation instead of optimizing for efficiency, which is what companies in the past did, or certain types of companies. And that seems to me that's because when you're thinking about getting your Broadway career, you're probably not optimizing for money, but when you're running a business, sometimes you have to do that. Is that a consideration?
Yeah, well, I think that the way that I think about it, and I make this point in the long game as well, is that anyone who in kind of a rudimentary sense follows investing or follows the stock market has a sense of basic principles, right? Like if you know one thing about the stock market, okay, don't put all your money in one stock. That's a bad idea. That's too risky. You want a basket. You want a diversified portfolio. But the problem is, I think not a lot of us make that connection with our careers. And so, of course, we want to have a kind of core base. You want to have the safer investments, the bonds that are going to be returning a certain amount to you, or you want to have the dividend stocks so that you can count on that. My friend Jonathan Brill, who I interview in the long game, calls it heartbeat income. What is the money you can count on so that you can take care of whatever you need? But if you only have that, you're sort of confining yourself to a very certain sphere. And so what is often better is to have some small percentage. And again, it could be 20%. If you're feeling a little bit risk averse, it could even be smaller, 10%, 5%, but have something in speculative investments. And, that applies to, to portfolio allocation. It could be angel investing if you're an accredited investor. It could be, a growth stock or, something like that. But in our own lives, it's, well, what is our growth stock? What is the thing that it might not work out, but it actually could be enormous. It could be fulfilling, but also, who knows? Depending on what you are optimizing for, there's possibilities. They say in Broadway, it's impossible to make a living on Broadway, but it is possible to make a killing. And so if we do it right, who knows? This could actually eclipse any money that I make from corporate consulting. But also it could make me no money whatsoever. I'm willing to accept that because it is my 20% bet.
Dr. Ogilvy makes a remark that it's the pressure of Wall Street. And you live near Wall Street, don't you, Dorie? So
I do. I'm waving to Wall Street right now. I live one street over. That is true.
How much was that an inspiration as you're writing the book? I can imagine you're looking out the window saying that's how to do it wrong.
That's right. Yeah, walk past the bull, pat its horns. Yes, Wall Street is. I think it is a good metaphor, honestly, because so many companies have, the pressure always is the quarterly earnings, and that is the standard. That's the default. And I think it really is problematic. It is not impossible, but you have to be extremely protective and extremely aggressive in fighting against it. This is a place where, honestly, Amazon deserves a lot of credit. In the long game, I actually quote an interview that Jeff Bezos did 10 years ago, saying that he felt like the big secret to Amazon's success is that they were willing to plan and invest on a 7-year horizon, whereas he thought most companies were only willing to do it on a 3-year horizon, meaning their investments would need to pay off within 3 years. For Amazon, if you do that, double, if you double the horizon, it means you can make bigger bets that commensurately have the ability, potentially, to pay off in much bigger ways down the road. And so, thinking that through and appreciating that, he had to fight all the time. It was, constant reminders, hey, don't get excited about quarterly earnings. We're plowing everything back into the company. We're plowing it back into R&D. For years, that was the mantra. Don't expect profits. But when you do that, it sets you up with a massive competitive moat that's able to pay off later on.
Yeah, it's interesting. The new book from Paul Polman, who obviously was the CEO at Unilever, and again tried to reject the pressure from Wall Street, the quarterly reporting, and said, "No, I'm managing the company for the long run," and fought the good fight for many years, for 10 years, I think. His book with Andrew Winston is out. It's called Net Positive. Great book, all about sustainability. But if we're going to have more sustainable organizations, and we're going to be net positive, you've got to play the long game. You can't keep the wolves of Wall Street happy as well. Dorie, despite the fact that we're all wanting to play the long game, we have run out of time. So we're going to have to leave it there. But the book is available now from all good bookstores. If people want to know more about what you're up to, best place to go is your website. Yeah,
thank you, Des. I appreciate it. It's you can find out more and get links to a free strategic thinking self-assessment if you'd like it at dorieclark.com/longgame. Thank you. It's so great to be here with you, gentlemen, and I appreciate this series as a really great way of getting new ideas out there. So thank you for having me.
That's fantastic. We're delighted you could join us. And join us, please, everybody, join us next week. Who have we got on next week, Stuart?
Amantha Imber at slightly earlier next Tuesday, and she's been shortlisted for our Innovation Award, and she's in Australia, and that's why it's slightly earlier.
Aha.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dorie, and thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks.